Dorothy Jean Vaillancourt, born Dorothy Jean Williams on August 24, 1917, in Hobart, Tasmania, lived a life that stretched across multiple continents, wars, and eras, only to end in mystery on a remote hillside in Northern California. For nearly 60 years, she was known only as Marion County Jane Doe, buried in an unmarked grave, her identity lost to time. However, thanks to advancements in DNA technology and the relentless hope of her daughter, Dorothy's story has finally resurfaced. During World War II, Dorothy served as a nurse in Sydney, Australia. It was there, in 1943, that she met and married Francis Arthur Vaillancourt, a U.S. Marine on R&R after fighting in Guadalcanal. Smitten with him in his dress whites, Dorothy followed her heart and in 1944 boarded the SS Lurline to begin a new life in America. They briefly lived in Massachusetts before settling in San Francisco, where they raised their growing family. Dorothy gave birth to 7 children, including twins Penelope and Pamela, and the family eventually moved into a Victorian home at 712 Steiner Street, one of the famous Painted Ladies of Alamo Square. Dorothy worked as a nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital near Buena Vista Park, and her husband found work as a painter. Life in the Vaillancourt household was, for a time, filled with joy. As for Dorothy herself, she was highly intelligent, spoke fluent French, and was very knowledgeable about plants, but life took a dark turn. On December 18, 1959, a severely beaten and sexually assaulted young woman, Susan Corlew, escaped her attacker and pounded on the Vaillancourt's door. Dorothy brought her in, wrapped her in a blanket, and called the police, ultimately saving her life. The trauma of that night seemed to mark a turning point. In the years that followed, Dorothy's marriage to Francis dissolved. She fell into alcoholism and struggled with her mental health. With Dorothy being unable to care for her children and their father working full-time, they were placed in Catholic-run orphanages. Penelope described their time in the Albertinum Orphan Asylum in Ukiah as abusive and traumatic. Eventually, the children were labeled incorrigible and transferred to another orphanage in San Francisco. During this period, Dorothy met and married a German immigrant named Hermann Hess in 1964. According to Penelope, Hess was a deeply disturbing man with a violent temper. He allegedly showed the children a photo of himself in a Nazi uniform, and records indicate he was born in 1911 in Germany. The family moved to a home in Fairfax, Marion County, but happiness eluded them. When Penelope was around 14, a violent altercation between Hess and the children erupted. Penelope said Hess punched her in the face and later tried to strangle her. Her brother threatened him with a gun, and police arrested Hess after witnessing the attack. The children returned to their father's care in San Francisco, and Dorothy remained with Hess. By late 1965, their home in Fairfax was ordered to be sold to pay off debts. Soon after, Dorothy vanished without a trace. On December 18, 1966, 15-year-old Arthur Muniz was hunting near Paradise Drive in Tiburon when he discovered a decomposing body about 25 feet down an embankment. The woman was dressed in a red cotton shift dress, a tan trench coat with blue plaid lining, and white slip-on shoes. A scarf was found in her coat pocket, a cigarette packed nearby, and she wore a Westclock's wristwatch. Though badly decomposed, she was described as 5 foot 2 inches, around 105 pounds, with reddish-brown hair and full upper dentures. A wire suture near her eye suggested prior facial surgery. The coroner estimated she had been dead for 2 to 3 months, likely since late September 1966. Despite fingerprinting and a statewide bulletin, no identification was made. Some suspected she had been a psychiatric patient. Others thought she might have stayed in a local motel. Fireman Thomas Murphy came forward to say that a woman matching the Jane Doe's description had visited the Trestle Glen fire station in late September, asking to stay the night. When denied, she asked to borrow a car. She was last seen walking toward Tiburon Boulevard. Her cause of death was inconclusive, no broken bones, no clear signs of trauma, but she had clearly died alone. Speculation ranged from hypothermia to she took her own life to foul play. However, without answers, she was buried as a Jane Doe at Mount Tamalpais Cemetery in San Rafael. In 2022, the Marin County Sheriff's Office reopened the cold case with help from the California DOJ and Othram Inc., a forensic genealogy lab in Texas. Using ultra-sensitive DNA testing and crowdfunding via Project Justice, Othram scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile of the unidentified woman and began tracing relatives. On December 18, 2024, exactly 58 years after the body was found, Penelope received the call. The Jane Doe from Tiburon was her mother. The discovery brought long-awaited closure but little comfort. She visited the site where her mother was found, now a serene spot in Paradise Beach Park. However, this left her with many questions. Was her mother killed? Did someone hit her with a car? Did she slip and fall? With no broken bones, some theorize Dorothy may have succumbed to hypothermia while sleeping outdoors. The presence of a scarf, despite it being early fall, suggests she may have been preparing for the cold. Temperatures at night in Tiburon during September could drop into the low 50s, and the area is known for its coastal winds. Others, including family, have questioned whether Herman Hesse played a role, though no evidence has confirmed this theory. Dorothy Vaillancourt was found dead on December 18, 1966, and as of April 2025, this case remains unsolved. Earl D. Bunch III was born in September 1968 to Alice Rollinson Idlett and Earl Bunch Jr. Unfortunately, Earl Jr. was deployed to Thailand during the Vietnam War, leaving Alice alone in Sulphur, Louisiana with the baby. As time went on, her emotional distress worsened, and she began writing disturbing letters to her husband overseas. These letters, which remained hidden for years until a custody dispute, revealed a harrowing account of a young mother struggling with motherhood, loneliness, and untreated mental illness. One of these letters, dated November 4, 1969, expressed Alice's intense hatred for her son, stating, quote, "I just got through whipping that little bastard. I hate him. That's the honest truth. I can't stand this life. God had to punish me by letting me have that little brat. I wish I would have died when he was born. I believe I could do it. I'm serious," unquote. Just a month later, on December 9, 1969, Alice confessed her darkest thoughts, expressing a desire for her son's death, saying, quote, "I feel as if he would die tomorrow, I wouldn't care. To me, he is the one who ruined my life," unquote. These letters further reveal Alice's growing obsession with her son and her desire to take his life before he became spoiled. These writings were kept by her husband, who, at the time, dismissed them as cries for help or exaggerations caused by stress. He had tried to take an emergency military leave when he sensed something was amiss, but his request was denied. Then, on January 20, 1970, Earl Jr. received some devastating news. His son was dead. The story he was given was that Earl fell off a bed and sustained a fatal injury. However, the truth was far more sinister. On January 19, 1970, when Alice brought her son to the emergency room at West Calcasieu Cameron Hospital, he was described as limp and gasping for air. X-rays revealed multiple skull fractures and a broken shoulder. Moreover, there were visible bite marks, bruises, and a burn on his buttocks. A physician informed investigators that the injuries were inconsistent with a fall and suggested that they were the result of severe physical abuse, possibly involving being swung by the feet and slammed against a hard object. Tragically, the baby succumbed to his injuries the following morning during emergency surgery. Despite the compelling evidence, no charges were filed at the time. Alice's denial and the lack of pressure from anyone to pursue a deeper investigation led to the case being closed due to insufficient evidence. It wasn't until 1983, during a custody battle following Alice and Earl's separation, that the chilling letters resurfaced. Earl had been granted temporary custody of their surviving child, an 8-year-old daughter named Angela Michelle Bunch, when he decided to revisit the past. Rereading the long-forgotten letters from Alice, he realized their profound implications. Subsequently, he contacted the doctor who had treated their son and was horrified to learn the full extent of baby Earl's injuries. Earl attempted to gain full custody of his daughter, arguing that Alice was an unfit mother. However, at the time, psychologists and child protection standards were vastly different, despite concerns raised during an interview with a daughter who now is believed to have exhibited early signs of complex PTSD. The court ruled that both mother and child were mentally and physically healthy. Joint custody was awarded in 1985. Remarkably, Alice went on to lead a seemingly normal life. She became a nurse, reportedly working as a travel nurse, and in her later years, she traveled extensively to various places like Switzerland, Alaska, Isle of Rotan, and Germany. Throughout her life, she evaded justice for the death of her firstborn son. In 2022, more than 50 years after the child's death, detectives with the Sulphur Police Department reopened the case at the urging of Earl's surviving family. Advancements in forensic science and child abuse investigations led authorities to exhume the body of Earl D. Bunch III. His remains were sent to the FBI for a forensic autopsy, which concluded that the toddler had indeed been murdered. The autopsy officially classified the manner of death as homicide. On March 27, 2025, Alice was arrested and charged with her son's murder. She's currently being held on a $950,000 bond. Edwin Lee Sinclair Daniels was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. In 1994, 12-year-old Edwin and his family moved to Florida. Growing up, Edwin found an outlet in technology and eventually turned his interest into a career, working for Verizon to support his family. At age 35, he was a devoted father, always there for his children. In 2002, he had a son with a woman he had dated, though their relationship ended after some time. Despite the split, Edwin maintained a strong relationship with his son, prioritizing his children above all else. In 2007, Edwin began a relationship with Latoya Woodard, a Florida native with a complicated past. Woodard had 3 sons from a previous marriage and had served in the U.S. Navy. However, she was accused of desertion and was discharged after she claimed she could not arrange childcare while serving. Their relationship seemed to progress quickly, and they eventually moved in together and had 2 daughters. After nearly a decade together, they married in 2016 and settled into a new home in Deltona, Florida, north of Orlando, with Woodard's friend, Crystal Leedy. Sadly, within 2 years, Edwin would be dead. On the night of April 13, 2018, Crystal called 911, reporting that Edwin had been stabbed. She said, "My roommate was stabbed. I think somebody might have broken in or something," Leedy said, clearly frantic. "He's not moving at all. I'm sorry, his wife's just flipping out right now." When officers arrived, they found that Edwin had been brutally stabbed multiple times and was pronounced dead at the scene. Woodard, in a state of distress, told detectives that she had been sleeping in the master bedroom when the attack occurred. She claimed that an intruder must have entered the home and killed Edwin. However, there were no signs of forced entry, and the bed in the master bedroom appeared to be made, which did not support her story. Detectives also found no evidence of a robbery, since nothing was missing from the house. As investigators began collecting evidence, they found several knives in the house, one of which was a cheese knife discovered in the kitchen sink. Woodard, still visibly upset, was taken to the hospital and later interviewed by detectives. She described her relationship with Edwin as normal, but admitted they fought at times, though they always reconciled afterward. On the day of the murder, Woodard claimed she had come home from work, asked Leedy to pick up the kids from school, and then went to bed, only to be awoken by a loud noise later. She went downstairs and discovered Edwin injured. However, when Leedy was interviewed, her account did not match Woodard's. Leedy said Woodard didn't return home until approximately 7 p.m., and after that, Leedy went to Walmart. When she returned, she saw Woodard, who instructed her to call 911. Leedy claimed Woodard was too hysterical to provide any explanation. There was further confusion when detectives compared Leedy's statement to the 911 call, where she claimed to have heard a commotion before leaving for Walmart. Leedy admitted to investigators that when she left for Walmart, Edwin was at home and the couple was fighting. When she returned, she found Woodard crying over Edwin's body. Despite these inconsistencies, both Woodard and Leedy were released While detectives continued to investigate, Edwin's autopsy revealed the full extent of his injuries: 34 stab wounds, including wounds to his head, face, tongue, esophagus, and abdomen. He had suffered a depressed skull fracture, indicating the attack was both brutal and personal. The severity of the assault suggested that the killer was someone who knew Edwin well, and the weapon found at the scene, a cheese knife, was consistent with the wounds. Detectives learned that Woodard had been in a relationship with a man named Alan Roberson, a 26-year-old who worked with her at a fast food restaurant. Authorities found that Woodard had been texting Alan about a miscarriage, something she had not mentioned to Edwin. These messages revealed the depth of the relationship between Woodard and Alan, leading investigators to believe that it played a significant role in Edwin's death. Alan's employer reported that he had a meltdown at work on the day of the murder, and Woodard was seen visiting him that afternoon. When detectives tried to interview Alan, he refused to speak without a lawyer. Their investigation into his alibi revealed that he had been at home with his mother and sister, but the lengths he went to protect Woodard raised red flags. Authorities later subpoenaed Alan in September 2018, offering him immunity in exchange for his testimony against Woodard. However, his interview yielded no new information. His evasiveness only reinforced investigators' belief that he was protecting Woodard. Despite Alan's unwillingness to cooperate, investigators felt they had enough evidence to move forward with charges against Woodard. On November 15, 2018, Woodard was arrested. It was then revealed that Edwin had a $100,000 life insurance policy through his work, and Woodard had attempted to claim the payout shortly after his death. This added a financial motive to the already mounting evidence against her. On February 7, 2020, Woodard was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. She was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on July 15, 2020. Now 37, Woodard is incarcerated at the Homestead Correctional Institution for Women, where she will remain for the rest of her life. Megan Nichols was born on July 18, 1998, in the small farming community of Fairfield, Illinois. At just 15 years old, she was known as an energetic and happy young lady who brought joy to those around her. Megan was a promising student at Fairfield High School, a dedicated cheerleader, and an athlete. However, everything changed on the evening of July 3, 2014, when Megan went missing. Megan's mother, Kathy Jo Hutchcraft, had planned to go shopping that evening, but Megan, who was feeling unwell, decided to stay home. When Kathy Jo returned about an hour later, Megan was strangely gone. In Megan's room, Kathy Jo found a note, which seemed to have been written by Megan, stating she had run away because, according to the note, she would never be happy at home. However, her mother felt these words were out of character for her daughter and immediately knew something was wrong. Megan's cell phone was also missing, and when it was later found, it had been wiped clean of all data, including photos, contacts, and messages. This was yet another sign that something sinister had happened. As Kathy Jo's worry grew, she noticed unusual activity in Megan's bank account. Surveillance footage from a local ATM showed Megan on her bike withdrawing money just before her disappearance. What stood out to Kathy Jo was a car seen in the background of the video. That car turned out to be Brody Merbarger's car, who Megan had been secretly dating. Even though Kathy Jo had suspected it, Megan never confided in her about the relationship. Brody, 18 years old at the time, had been dating Megan during the summer of 2014. Although Kathy Jo had her suspicions about their relationship, she didn't know just how serious it had become. Kathy Jo had also found text messages between Megan and Brody, suggesting their relationship had turned romantic. She had tried to intervene by confiscating Megan's phone, but Megan continued to stay in contact with Brody, and the two had even planned to run away together. Kathy Jo had witnessed firsthand how Merbarger manipulated her daughter. He showed up at their house after Kathy Jo forbade Megan from seeing him, telling her that she was too controlling and needed medication. When Kathy Jo responded by asserting her authority as a mother, Merbarger texted her, threatening to involve Child Protective Services. Kathy Jo refused to engage with him, but it was clear that Merbarger was becoming more manipulative and controlling. Even with that, authorities initially considered Megan's disappearance to be a runaway case. However, Kathy Jo and her family refused to believe this theory. Merbarger would become a prime suspect in 2016 when his car was involved in a crash. The FBI managed to track down the car, which had been sold to a salvage yard after the accident. Testing revealed a blood stain in the car's trunk that was confirmed to be Megan's blood, a discovery that left everyone, including Merbarger's best friend Kyle Ellis, who didn't believe Merbarger was involved in Megan's disappearance, shocked. In addition to the blood in his car, Merbarger also provided investigators with multiple inconsistent accounts of the night Megan disappeared. His story continued to shift, with each new explanation raising more questions. Plus, his failure to provide a solid alibi only further deepened the suspicion surrounding him. Regardless of the blood, Megan was still nowhere to be found. 3 years later, in 2017, Megan's remains were found buried in a rural area in Wayne County, just outside their hometown. Her cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, likely caused by homicidal violence. The case quickly shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation. Despite the evidence, he was not arrested immediately. The case took another turn when his best friend, Kyle, was brought into the investigation. In 2020, 2 FBI agents came to Kyle with alarming news. They had evidence suggesting Merbarger was involved in Megan's murder. They also proposed an unusual plan. They wanted Kyle to confront Merbarger and wear a wire during the conversation. After days of deliberation, Kyle agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. Kyle had known Merbarger since high school, and their friendship had been a close one. The two had been valedictorians at Fairfield Community High School, both smart, ambitious kids who wanted to escape the confines of their small-town life. The friendship he had with him was built on years of shared experiences and mutual respect. However, when Kyle learned of Megan's disappearance, his first reaction was to text Merbarger, not to get the details of what happened, but to offer advice, particularly urging him not to talk to anyone without a lawyer. Merbarger, however, repeatedly spoke with authorities, offering conflicting statements about his whereabouts and involvement in Megan's disappearance. Faced with mounting evidence, Kyle agreed to help the FBI. They instructed him to confront Merbarger while wearing a wire. On July 2, 2018, Kyle met with Merbarger, and the conversation took a tense turn. Kyle asked Merbarger about the blood in his car, and his response was chilling, quote, "I would like to know that too," unquote. When Kyle asked him if he had killed Megan, Merbarger denied it, but his words seemed to hint at a deeper truth. He suggested he couldn't have been physically capable of strangling someone, but implied that someone with anger issues might have done it. Kyle described the exchange as a pin-drop moment. While Merbarger's statement didn't constitute a confession, it was the closest he came to one. The FBI had long suspected that Megan had been strangled in a fit of rage, and Kyle's recording helped solidify the case against Merbarger. 6 years passed before Merbarger was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder in 2020. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Pamela Shelley was born on July 25, 1969, and grew up in Arkansas. She later moved to Cuero, Texas, where she lived with her boyfriend, Ronnie Hendrick, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Kayla and 9-year-old Dustin. At 32, Pam, tired of her troubled relationship with Hendrick, finally decided to leave with the children and return to Arkansas. Unfortunately, her plans were cut short by the one person she was trying to get away from. On January 6, 2001, at 5:15 p.m., about 20 minutes before she was set to leave, a call came in to 911 reporting that Pam had shot herself in the bathroom of the home she shared with Hendrick. When the police arrived at the house, Pam was already in an ambulance on her way to the hospital, and Hendrick was with her, making him unavailable for immediate questioning. At the scene, police observed blood on the bathroom floor and walls, and a pistol was found on the counter. While the gunshot wound appeared consistent with a self-inflicted injury, investigators were suspicious. When they were finally able to question Hendrick, he reiterated that Pam had shot herself. According to his statement, he had been outside when he heard the gunshot, rushed inside, and found her on the bathroom floor, bleeding from the head. He also claimed that he shielded Kayla and Dustin from seeing their mother's body. Hendrick suggested that Pam had been depressed about returning to Arkansas due to family issues, particularly her strained relationship with him and Kayla. However, Pam had been moments away from leaving Hendrick, and it didn't make sense that she went through the trouble of packing up all their belongings only to turn around and shoot herself. Sadly, Pam was declared brain dead at the hospital, and after being taken off life support, they ruled she took her own life. The medical examiner's report supported Hendrick's version, noting a contact wound with a gun positioned at the side of Pam's head. However, Sheriff Carl Bowen, who had been part of the original investigation, was unconvinced. Bowen, familiar with Hendrick's abusive tendencies, found it hard to believe that Pam, a woman who was on the verge of escaping an abusive relationship, would take her own life. In the years following Pam's death, the case went cold, but Bowen, now a more senior member of the DeWitt County Sheriff's Office, could not let the case go. In 2008, he pushed to reopen the investigation, believing there was more to the story, especially in light of Hendrick's history of domestic abuse. Hendrick had agreed to take a polygraph test during the original investigation, but had missed several appointments, and eventually he went missing, further complicating the case. The breakthrough came in 2012 when Hendrick was incarcerated on charges of domestic abuse. Bowen seized the opportunity to re-interview Hendrick, but his story continued to change. On the day of the murder, Hendrick claimed he was outside when the shooting occurred, but during his re-interview, he admitted that he had been inside the house when Pam was shot. These inconsistencies only raised more questions. Bowen also learned that Hendrick had a history of abusive behavior with other women, and a particularly troubling detail emerged. Just days before Pam's death, Hendrick had severely beaten her, leaving her with visible bruises that required emergency room treatment. Further forensic analysis of the gun used in the shooting provided more unsettling findings. No DNA was found on the weapon. This suggested that the gun had been wiped clean, indicating a deliberate attempt to conceal evidence. This discovery prompted the medical examiner to change Pam's cause of death to undetermined, providing more ammunition for Bowen's theory that Pam's death was not self-inflicted. Bowen's investigation gained momentum when he spoke with Pam's former mother-in-law. She revealed that Pam had been in secret contact with her ex-husband, Jesse Suggs, using a burner phone. Pam had secretly planned to return to him, and during a phone conversation, Hendrick had threatened Jesse, saying the only way Pam was coming back to Arkansas was in a pine box. This statement provided investigators with a clear motive for murder: Hendrick's desire to prevent Pam from leaving him. With this new evidence, authorities took the case to a grand jury. In the fall of 2012, Hendrick was indicted for the murder of Pamela Shelley. After more than a decade, the case that had once seemed closed was now moving toward justice. In September 2013, Hendrick's trial was delayed due to a small jury pool, but just weeks before the trial, he pled guilty to the murder of Pamela Shelley and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. For Pamela's family, this was a long-awaited moment of justice. Thanks to the persistence of her daughter Kayla, Sheriff Bowen's unwavering commitment, and the support of the Cold Justice team, Pam's death was finally recognized for what it truly was: a tragic murder.